Hello guys, this is Fifth World Strategy coming to you at the 8th of March 2025 with another one. The Kursk pocket has collapsed. This was pretty much inevitable. Now, perhaps, collapse is somewhat of a premature statement to make. Clearly, the Russians have moved and come in south of the Ukrainian forces in a pincer maneuver. Two key regions. One is a forested area, sort of around the Russo-Ukrainian border, that the Russians have moved into. And of course, the Russians moved in that's sort of on the eastern flank. On the western flank, they're approaching the town called Basovka. Now, the mainstream media and many pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian telegram channels are in some ways prematurely talking about the cauldron being closed off and Ukrainian troops being completely surrounded. It's our view at Fifth World Strategy that this is somewhat premature. What we do know is that in a northeastern town that's within the Kursk pocket, the Ukrainians have pretty much offered very little, if not no resistance, and completely retreated from this area. And that's in the northwestern edge of the pocket. So what's more, the Russians have complete fire control over the main road going into Suja, which is the largest town, the kind of main hub that the Ukrainians control in the Kursk region. The supply lines are completely under the control. Certainly the fire control of the Russians. So this gives the Ukrainian troops trapped in the pocket kind of insurmountable at this point logistical issues, which exacerbate the problem. Roughly speaking, we know of the Russians believe that there are around 6,000 to 8,000 Ukrainian troops in the Kursk pocket. Now, we know that a brigade is 3,000 to 5,000 men, but we also know that Ukrainian brigades are far from full strength. So we're looking at sort of several brigades, maybe 3, 4, part strength type brigades, but we'll see about the sort of technicals of all of that. We know that the Russian forces operating are in large part Chechen units. We know about various airborne units as well, some sort of FSB type units, as well as maybe some special forces. Now, could the Russians introduce more troops, follow-up units? Because if we look at this engagement, it is a rather large-scale operation. In the war thus far, the Russians haven't closed cauldrons. They've typically kept the cauldrons open, allowing forces to kind of like withdraw, going with a sort of Sun Tzu approach, if you will, which is, that you never fully surround your enemy. Now, do I think that they're actually getting it from Sun Tzu? No, they're probably doing that because it's the most pragmatic kind of operational doctrine. They don't take as many losses trying to hold the cauldron closed, and fend off any counterattacks. But in this case, it could be that the Ukrainians are weakened enough for this to be the case. But we don't know. But this is why I say that it's premature. So we see kind of an operational encirclement of the Ukrainians. The Russians are nearby. The main road is still open, but they have, again, fire control of the roads coming in, and they're threatening, perhaps, in a way, forcing the Ukrainians to react to it somehow, whether they'll withdraw. And it seems to me that the Western media and many of the people that are in some ways sounding the alarm somewhat prematurely could be almost trying to, and of course the Russians too, it could be Russian propaganda to try and get the Ukrainians to dislodge themselves. But it does seem that clearly the trend of things is towards a complete closing of the cauldron, perhaps, but it's not yet the case. And the reason I say that is that the Russians certainly need to take the town of Basovka in the sort of slight, if we think of the cauldron in two flanks, the eastern and the western flank, That's on the western flank. And then there's another couple of towns. I don't have a map nearby right now, but there's a couple towns along the road. I think one is Orsuvka or something like that, that they would probably need to physically control in order to have that tactical level encirclement. Now, tactical being the closest range control of the roads going in and out. So they would need to control those towns in order to control the road. So that needs to happen. Now, if we think of this, what I would say about this assault or this operation is it seems a little bit closer to more traditional, you could say, Russian maneuver-style warfare as opposed to the more gradual processes that we've seen in the it's a pincer move, and they're going for a kind of fixing operation in the actual salient itself. Obviously, the Russians moving forward and the Ukrainians offering very little resistance. But the point is that there seem to be, or likely to be, follow-up elements that can consolidate control and allow for deeper penetration. Now, if the Russians do take the towns and completely block off the logistical supplies into Suja, that would be, obviously a kind of penetration into the operational depths, and it would follow that kind of deep battle style of warfare, if you will. This is all in the context of Ukraine losing a lot of their C-free ISR, so command, control, communication, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, that has been supplied by the United States. And that obviously has left Ukraine in a very vulnerable position. Now, obviously the Russians had made these pincers, if you will, before, and so it's not, this happened initially about a week ago. It's now just reaching the mainstream media. But obviously the Russians have made more have made deeper penetrations since then, and now it's gotten to a point where it's signing the alarm bells. Now, with that intelligence diminishment, their general forces at the front are going to be more vulnerable to deep strikes, and they're going to have less of an idea about the Russian order of battle. So their kind of fog of war is setting on the Ukrainians, at least at the moment, which makes everything more difficult, and it favors an attacker, whereas obviously the Russian C-free ISR is perfectly intact. So, we are looking at, again, anywhere between, the initial Western estimates of the troop numbers in the Couldron were sort of like, they were saying up to 20,000 Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region, which might have been the case at its peak. Perhaps there's been significant drawdown since then. But the Russians now are saying 6,000 to 8,000. I would say several brigades, about Kursk, we're finishing up now soon. You get the sense that Ukrainian forces are overstretched in general, and they can't maintain their current force posture in general, and ultimately all of this at a kind of grand strategic level, or strategic back to the Second World War, this would allow that kind of, and you call it propaganda, messaging. This would allow that messaging to really take new life and new meaning. It would show the Russians in a sweep of kind of victory. And again, it does seem that the trend of the war is in that direction. Now, obviously, the Ukrainians can respond. There are things they can do. But the truth is they should have withdrawn from this pocket a long time ago. The initial targets seem to have been the Kursk nuclear power plant. This is now nearly a year that they've been in this region, and clearly they were never going to get to that target. And I think the hopes of holding on to it for political reasons were misplaced, and obviously the diversion of Ukrainian troops into the Kursk salient has been terrible for Ukraine's manpower resources, and has definitely contributed to their loss of territory in the Donbass. allowing the Russians to approach important supply areas like Petrovsk and to expand their bridgeheads across the Oskol River, as well as make general advances in many other areas. And so will lessons be learned? What will happen? Well, I suppose we can look at Ukraine's response to the current calamities and see if lessons will be learnt. This was predicted. I did make another video a while ago. I didn't post it, unfortunately. I will post it as a kind of prediction-y video, for this channel. And I did make a post about it, even though nobody here really follows the Telegram. But I did make a post about it on my Telegram channel about how I did believe that in general, last year, when this happened, that the Russian system would, over time, create the kind of conduits and arteries in this part of the front to then be able to launch effective blows that would then counter Ukraine's penetration. And not only that, but would actually lead to, powerful offensives that would go and take northeast of Ukraine, potentially. We're talking the Sumy region, we're talking, Chernihiv, we're talking connecting with large operations in kind of central eastern Ukraine. And that does seem all possible after this. I think that, again, it is sort of wishful thinking maybe on some of the Ukrainian and somewhat, you could say more pro-Ukrainian resources out there that believe the Russians will likely stop if they are to retake the Kursk area. But it seems to me that they're more likely to continue on into the Sumy region of Ukraine. And actually, in all fairness, it was actually at one point claimed by the Ukrainians that the actual purpose of the Kursk operation was to prevent the Russians from attacking in Sumy. So maybe there was even some truth to it. Nonetheless, Ukraine's defenses are going to be very weak because all the troops that would have manned them it sort of lays out the potential for the cutting off of support to Ukraine. But yeah, thanks for watching. This is Fifth World Strategy, and sayonara.